I'm Brian Hiatt. This is Rolling Stone Music Now. This week, Rolling Stone published a story I wrote and a song along with it that went pretty viral, and we're going to be exploring more of that story here today. So just last year, I did a bunch of stories about AI music, and the experts I spoke to agreed on one thing. Because recorded music and high-fidelity audio is so complex, they all said it would be years until a tool arrived that could generate finished songs, vocals and all, from a simple type description. And to be clear, things like that fake Drake Weeknd song from last year weren't anything like that. That song was entirely written and produced and sung by a human, with AI voice morphing added at the end. But generative AI is moving at astonishing speed. And this year, I became aware of a service named Suno that's succeeded in making a ChatGPT or Midjourney for music. Their latest model, V3, which just became available to the general public, is capable of some truly astonishing and unnerving results.
In this long, the bold, empty, bleak, I'm just a soul trapped in this circuitry. Oh, my heart used to beat, but now it's cold and weak. Oh, the pain inside me.
The song we included with the story we published was called Soul of the Machine, and it was generated entirely, including the title, from the prompt Solo Acoustic Mississippi Delta Blues about a sad AI. And it's technically a collaboration between two AI models, because Suno calls out to actual ChatGPT to write lyrics unless you paste in your own. We chose that genre, acoustic blues, to see how Suno would do with one of the hardest things to synthetically generate, very organic and bare guitar and voice. I don't know about you, but I found that song pretty unnerving and quite amazing, especially on a technical level. And so did a lot of other people. It also raised questions about cultural appropriation, artist rights, and the nature of Suno's training data. I was, of course, very curious about the nature of that data, but Suno is very clear that they won't reveal any details of it. In other words, we don't know for sure what songs they use to teach their model and whether they're copyrighted. Though one of their lead investors, Antonio Rodriguez of Matrix Partners, did tell me that they believe there's a risk of a lawsuit by major labels and publishers, which does suggest an answer to that question. In a minute, I'm going to play an interview with Suno co-founder Mikey Shulman, and also preview some of the other products of my time playing around with Suno's V3 model. Before we published the story, I sent Soul of the Machine to Living Color's Vernon Reid, who had spoken with me before about AI and music, including on this podcast. He sent back a really thoughtful mini essay, and I wanted to read some of it. He notes that his reactions are, quote, a combination of wonder, shock, horror, and he adds that the use of an African-American idiom deeply tied to historical human trauma and enslavement, merely to demonstrate how close to, quote, human the AI can become, is disturbing. He also says he was stunned on a technical level that all of it was generated by AI, quote, not just the acoustic rural blues guitar and the mournful bluesman's vocals, but also the room ambience of the simulated recording. No mics, no board, no high-ceiling converted small church transformed into a mobile recording space by a young, committed Alan Lomax-type character. It is not inconceivable that the Alan Lomax archive, and a lot more besides, was rated to train Suno's AI. The long-running dystopian ideal of separating difficult, messy, undesirable, and despised humanity from its creative output is at hand. The horror of what Soul in the Machine portends lays in the fact that what has been presented at this stage will not remain static. What is certain is this: humans driven by extraordinary circumstances to make beautiful, haunting, funny, strange, powerful, popular, cathartic, healing, and obscure songs, those who have suffered and struggled to advance their craft, will have to contend with the wholesale automation of the very dear-bought art they have fought to achieve. With all that very much in mind, and the understanding that generative AI ethics is a subject of intense debate across the board, I do think this is worth engaging with and understanding. It's clear that the initial excitement ChatGPT sparked when it first dropped has really given way to an understandable amount of general suspicion, hostility, and fear for everyone's jobs. A lot of people are no longer greeting these advancements with a lot of excitement. Again, all that said, here are a few more things that I quote-unquote made. First of all, in case you're not angry enough at me, out of pure mischief, I asked it with its usual help from ChatGPT to make both pro and anti Joe Biden songs. Here's the anti one.
Genocide, your times
And here's the pro one. Very upbeat.
Listen up, my friends, it's time to state my view. Got some thoughts about Biden, gotta share them with you. He's got some policies that I don't always agree, but overall he's a decent president, can't you see? He's got experience, been in politics for a while, knows the game, knows how to make the people smile. Yeah, I know there's room for critiques, no doubt, but compared to the alternative, he's standing out. I'm voting for Biden, yeah, he's the decent choice. Above average president, gotta give him my voice. I see potential in it, changes he can make. So on election day, my ballot's his to take. I backslap the bed and I tap the die.
And finally, here's what I got when I tried to make something scary, which isn't very scary, but it certainly is something.
The world is an abyss. I am standing at the edge. The world is a bloody kiss. I'm drinking the dregs. There's no escape from the world prison. Don't know how much more I can take of the world prison.
And here's an alternate version of that, which I kind of like.
I am standing at the edge. The world is a bloody kiss. I'm drinking the dregs. There's no escape from the world prison. Don't know how much more I can take of the world prison.
But anyway, after that little AI concert, here is my conversation with Suno co-founder Mikey Shulman. And after this, I promise I will never again play the Suno-generated Rolling Stone Music Now theme song you're about to hear.
Rolling Stone music now cheers you up when you're feeling weak. Rolling Stone music now is the part you want.
There's an article that people can read, but what do you want this thing to be?
I think the mission here is to grow all of the ways in which people are interacting with music. We look at, say, something like video games. People spend so much more time on video games than on music. And it's because video games are active, they're interactive, they're multiplayer, they're like really rich experiences. And for most people, music is a very passive, half paying attention, listening experience. And how far can we get in letting people make music, think about music, critique music, make music with other people, share music, all of the different things that are not accessible to most people now? We want to let people do that.
For various reasons that blues song stands out, you've acknowledged that the biggest challenge was making things that are, very organic, sound decent. And it sounds more than decent. So I sent it to a bunch of people, including Vernon Reid, who is, of course, the guitarist in Living Colour. He shares a perspective that probably a fair number of musicians share, which is a combination of fascination and trepidation and concern. And his first reaction was he used the phrase disturbing verisimilitude, which is well said. He said, the long-running dystopian ideal of separating messy, undesirable, and despised humanity from its creative output is at hand. You've said that you don't want to challenge the primacy of human artists, but I wonder what you think of a reaction like that.
I think that's like incredibly well put, and creativity that makes me like pretty sure we're not going to out Vernon anytime soon. But I totally understand the sentiment, and I would say that the way we think about it, it's reasonably uninspired when some new technology comes out to just shove that new technology into the old thing. And I think in this case, also not only uninspired, not really going to work. We love artists because of the human connection that we have to them. And if you were just going to stream some AI generated music into your ears without that connection, I think you will enjoy it less. And I think the correct thing to do is to think about what are the ways that we can use this technology in ways that have not been sussed out. And that is why when we think about it like that, it becomes very obvious that music has really a very narrow set of interaction patterns for humanity, and we can use those to augment it. And I would say, instead of losing the human connection to the artist, I can make you a song. And in fact, you and I made a song together, and we feel closer to one another because we made that song. And how much more powerful is that when you do that with people, when you share it with people? I would also say that, again, uninspired is I'm just going to stream music that I'm going to enjoy because the machine knows what I'm going to enjoy. Much more inspired is this is a tool for helping me explore my own likes and dislikes, for helping me change my likes and dislikes, for helping me find new ways of interacting with it. I think this is cliche, but more generally, it's yes, there are things that are scary and bad uses of every technology. I think in this case, actually, a lot of them aren't going to work, but then there are also amazing uses for this technology. Yeah, it's not to downplay that trepidation, but I don't really see AI changing the connection that we have to other people. Reasonable people can disagree, but I don't really worry about the small marginal effects of AI decreasing connections between humans, because I think in total, the effect of these technologies should be to bring people much, much closer, certainly in music.
The other sort of moral argument that you've seen leveled against places like OpenAI with ChatGPT and Midjourney and all these things is that inevitably there's been an absorption, a learning of output from humans, of artistic output from humans. And then people are making for-profit companies that are profiting off the things that were ultimately produced by human creators, and that there's injustice in that. And this is something you thought about and talked about.
I totally understand that perspective. I think this has been happening without AI for a long time too. My tastes in music are very much impacted by who I was listening to at various formative musical periods of my life. And when I make music, and I'm not amazing, but when I make music, it is very much impacted by that. I think it is still rather, I'll come back to the thing I said before, it's still rather uninspired to say we're going to take that technology and just wholesale replace the artists that things have learned from. I think it doesn't really work that way in music. And it's also just not the big impact that is possible here. And we have been really focused on letting people make original music, not only because we think that's the moral, legal, and ethical thing to do, but also because we think that's like the long-lasting, enduring use case of how in 20 years people will want to do music. And using the word do there deliberately, I'm not saying make or listen, it's do. There's like a set of things.
There's a famous quote from Jurassic Park that keeps coming up in the world of AI, and it goes, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should." How much do you think about if we should in the case of this company?
You know, it's funny also because we have a lot of scientists at the company, or I guess maybe ex-scientists. The short answer is all the time. And I think one thing that we've been very deliberate here at the company is instilling a culture of real love of music. In that sense, you kind of have the morals and ethics around some of these issues kind of baked in to the DNA of the company. We have people who used to perform, some poorly, some less poorly. So I think there is actually a fair amount of empathy for that problem. It's funny, there is a flip side, which is there is not as much empathy, for example, with someone who doesn't know anything about music or doesn't play music at the company. And that presents problems if we are really trying to empathize with the person who is a real music novice who is coming to our platform for the first time. And so we end up having to talk to users quite a bit there.
The new model that you have, V3, is the one exciting, scary, however people want to see it, but it's definitely groundbreaking. This is the model that, I'll play in the intro to this, made some of the best stuff I've heard, including the blues song. That model is available to paid users in an alpha version right now, but I believe soon we'll be going wider. Is that correct?
Yes, very soon. I think this week we hope to go wider and give this to everybody and roll out some other kind of small changes to fix some of the holes that have been in this alpha release.
What kind of holes are in the alpha?
Oh, I'll try not to badmouth our product too much, but some quality of life things. Sometimes things won't sing. Sometimes a song will end maybe too abruptly, and takes a user base to help surface those.
We've discussed this, but it does feel like V3 in particular is a sort of milestone. It creates some of the most realistic generative AI music I've ever heard. I know that there was moments in the process where you guys knew that this was a big next step.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think our thinking on this is always evolving, but we certainly knew once we had a first cut of V3 that it is, let's put it this way, I think V2, we would have users love it, but really have to give us a pass on lots of inadequacies. And I think just the number of people who will have to do some mental gymnastics around ignoring some of these deficiencies is going to be greatly reduced in V3. It's not perfect by any means. There's no illusions here.
In some beyond alpha experimental stage, is there a V4 or is that like way too early?
We're always thinking about what comes next. I think audio is really far behind in the world of AI, but just like maybe the other modalities like images and text, it takes training a model and playing with it to really understand where it's deficient. I think we're beginning to really understand that. And so we're beginning to plan for V4. It's going to be a long time before it comes. Don't hold your breath, but hopefully you'll enjoy V3 in the meantime.
When you say a long time,
hopefully less than a year, but don't hold me to anything.
One of the things we talked about when I visited your headquarters is the fact that in many ways you're doing for audio, doing for music, what LLMs like ChatGPT do for language. You're following many of the same sort of processes as far as training, as far as the way the model works. It's at least parallel. You're learning from what they did. Can you explain a little bit of that? It's worth people trying to understand this.
Sure, I'll do my best here. I think a lot of the realization when we started the company was that audio is very far behind images and text, and that there's a quote unquote correct way of trying to do it, which is to train the buzzword would be a foundation model, but you can think like GPT. GPT is a model that is able to spew almost arbitrary text, and it puts the onus on the user to figure out how to get the right stuff out of it. And there's nothing that says music shouldn't be exactly the same way. And so what we said is we're going to try to take a similar approach of making models that are able to spew out arbitrary audio, and then we will do the hard work of figuring out how to pull the right audio out of it. And this is an approach that I think we've learned from text. We didn't have to figure this out ourselves. This is an approach that has proven just highly adaptable so that the next thing and the next thing and the next thing that you want to learn to do with one of these models gets easier and not harder and harder. We've not made a secret about it. We benefit a lot from looking at the world of text, and so much good research has happened there and so much good technology has been built there. And our edge, I think, has been to really focus hard on the things that are different about audio and to borrow from the open source text community all of the amazing technologies that they build.
Now, one of the things that LLMs do with language is they break down language into discrete microsegments called tokens, right? And that's how they learn to process it. That's how they learn to absorb it. And one of the challenges in audio, and for you specifically, was the amount of information that you needed to tokenize in sort of every millisecond of audio. I wonder if you could break that down a little bit.
Absolutely. Text has the good fortune of mostly being broken down into discrete things called words and are very recognizable and easy. And a sentence is a handful of words, and a paragraph is some dozens of words, or maybe 100 words. And audio does not do that good favor. And audio is both a continuous signal, it's not into discrete little things. It's just a continuous waveform. And in some sense, a bigger problem is that audio, high quality audio, is going to be sampled at 48 kilohertz or 44 kilohertz. And so that means that every second of audio is going to have some 50,000 samples in it. And if you follow the world of text, there's all of this arms race in some sense of people talk about the context window of these different LLMs, but it's basically how many tokens, how many discrete things will fit into the model at once. And we were going to be dead in the water if we could only model 1 second of audio at a time. And so the goal for us, and where we focus a lot of our energy, is how do we discretize this audio in a reasonable way where each discrete component is not a microsecond of audio, but where we can have each discrete component represent a reasonable amount of audio so that we don't have to model, let's say, 1 million discrete components in order to model a human-sized chunk of audio of, let's say, 2 minutes. And I think that's still an ongoing process for us. We're always trying to get better, but that is where we focus a lot of our time.
I wonder if you could talk about how in the training you connect the sounds to descriptions.
I'll back up for a second and say at a really high level, people describe audio in a very diverse set of ways. If you and I listen to the same piece of music, we are going to describe it very differently. And that is both a problem for us because it means there's a lot more understanding that we will need to bake into these models. But that's also an immense tool because it means that the descriptive space here, all of the words that we're going to use, is just so rich. And actually something we've learned is that lots of people, if you bump into somebody and you walk down the street with them and you say what kind of music they like, they're going to give you a genre. But really, novices and professionals will describe vibes and they'll use adjectives. And the combination of these two things is really powerful. And basically, it has been our job to figure out how to map all of these words into the different sounds. And that is both asking people to describe what they're hearing and also leveraging lots of other tools you can think at a very high level. Large language models learn that like and love are kind of two similar words. And we can actually leverage a lot of similar large language models tools to basically learn synonyms and antonyms of musical descriptions. And so we can augment the little bit of data we have on the problem into a lot of data.
You don't go into the details of what the training data was. There's obviously a large corpus of audio available. I don't quite understand how you made the model understand not only do I have this huge amount of audio I've been trained on, but here's how it connects to a description. You talk about having people manually do it, but that I can't imagine. That doesn't seem like a solution that scales.
It doesn't scale, but it certainly helps you get started. And for lots of these descriptive tasks, you shouldn't be thinking like internet-sized data for a lot of these descriptive tasks. You don't actually need that much. And that is the benefit of this so-called foundation model approach, which is that each successive thing that you want to teach the model should get easier and easier. You'd be surprised how little data for some of these things you might actually need.
We played with it a little bit, but eventually we got to, I think, solo acoustic Mississippi Delta blues. How specifically does it know what Mississippi Delta blues sounds like?
So it doesn't ever need to have seen exactly that thing. The whole point of this is to be able to extrapolate and interpolate. And so it's heard what solo means in lots of other contexts. Maybe it learns this is a single instrument or a single singer. And by the way, it'll sometimes get it wrong. And you saw we had to iterate to get there.
Yeah.
And then it has a general understanding of what blues is because we almost certainly have some tabulated data of examples of blues. And so these don't ever all have to coincide with the same thing. And in fact, I think we see a ton of fun being had by people making genres that don't exist of hybrids of lots of different genres. I'll just tell you something fun. I went to go give a talk at MIT last weekend and I got to make a song with an audience of a couple hundred people. And I got to say, you in the first row, give me a genre. And you in the second row, give me another genre. And you in the third row, give me another genre. And you in the fourth row, give me a fourth genre. And you in the fifth row, what are we making a song about? And I think it was like a metal, reggae, country EDM song. And there's some interpretation of what the confluence of those genres is. And I promise you, the model has never seen a metal, reggae, country EDM song in its life before.
You pointed out that there's a dystopia that people bring up where they're like, whether with your tool or other tools, that people will just start flooding Spotify with created music. And you pointed out that A, that's not at all what your plan is or your expectation, then B, that you wouldn't make a dime if people flooded Spotify with AI created music from Suno, because that's not how it works. But your business model, at least at the moment, is people subscribing for the ability to make unlimited songs, to use the latest model at the moment, and just a subscription model. And so that's not your plan. You don't have any particular desire or benefit from people flooding Spotify with Suno songs.
That's exactly right. We certainly hope that people are proud of what they make with our tools. We know that people do their Suno-made music on various platforms. We almost don't care if you get 1 billion streams on Spotify and become famous. And maybe it's actually just as important to us that you sent this to your mom on her birthday, and that was an important moment for her. Yes, our business model is also set up that way, but it's not just an expedient thing. It's because that's like the future that we see that we are trying to bring forward.
We should talk about what you don't allow users to do, and that includes you can't write the names of real artists in the description. You can't try to summon their voices. You can't try to precisely mimic an artist's style. That's built in that you cannot do that.
That's correct. We think that while it may be somewhat catchy and viral, it is both immoral and illegal, and also also not the long-lasting use case to make a new Taylor Swift song or a new Britney Spears song. And in fact, if you say in our platform, make me a Britney Spears song about podcasting, the model doesn't know who or what Britney Spears is. It will just ignore those words. And instead of just making a random song about podcasting, we take the opportunity to steer people toward what we think is the enduring use case here of making original music. I'll tell you just anecdotally, before we had that, and it would just ignore, we would get users trying to make, for example, a Daft Punk song, and that would come out as a punk song. Punk is a word that we understand, which is very bad user experience because you've made me the opposite, to the extent that I will say that one genre is the opposite of another. And I think this is one of those nice things where there isn't trade-offs. The use cases that we think are long-lasting and enduring are the legal, moral, and ethical ones, and I think are the most fun ones. That part's nice for us.
There's a lot of weird quirks. One of the things is that, and I've now heard so many, what it does, the same way that you can get sort of an AI image generator to generate convincing looking human beings who have never lived, in a similar way, I've now heard all these voices, distinct voices of singers who've never existed. And one of the weird things is, of course, you can never recapture that precise singer again. It's a weird quirk. And I don't imagine, would you like to get it to a place where you can be like, keep this singer and give it a different song? Is that possible?
That's a great question. That is definitely possible. And I think when we talk about what are the ways in which people want to interact with music, is having, you can call it a virtual persona, is having like a consistent virtual persona something that I want or something that I deliberately do not want? And I think we have a lot of discovery there to do. You could imagine that I can work very hard and create my own pop star. And maybe this is how someone who does not have that voice, but has an exact picture of what that voice is in their heads, this is how they express that and they try to become famous. And while we won't benefit financially, we would love to see somebody do that.
And as we discussed, right now, the way it works is much like a Midjourney or whatever. You type in your description. But in your ideal world and what you're planning, what you're thinking, you want to move beyond that. You think that there's better interfaces. I think one of the ones you thought about was even being able to just sing in a microphone and making something from that. What are you imagining there, and why is typing not the ideal way to do this?
Typing, I would say, is an ingredient in lots of ways. People want to be descriptive of what they want to listen to. And there's lots of other things that they might do. So it's not that we will not let you describe stuff with text in the future. It's that there's lots of other stuff that has to come. And I'll say this, I can say this because I'm a machine learning person. Machine learning people are very narrow-minded, and they can just think in terms of A to B. This is like text to image, text to audio. And that's not how a human being who isn't a machine learning person, who's just a random person on the street, thinks about making music or an image for that matter. And so we think about lots of different things, whether it's being able to do much more descriptive stuff in text. Maybe I want to tap a beat with a pencil on the table. Maybe I want to tap on my phone. Maybe I want to mood board a bunch of different songs or voices through the microphone. There's like lots of ways to let people pour themselves into music and get stuff out. And I think the last thing I'll say there is the reason we have connections to the people who make the music that we listen to, whether that is a famous artist or somebody who wrote me a song, it's because you know that they spent a long time pouring themselves into it. And I think just a small text box can be quite limiting there.
I spoke to Lucas Keller, who's the founder of the management firm Milk and Honey, which is probably the leading music management firm specifically for songwriters and producers. And he echoed, I'll lead into this with something else that Vernon Reid said, which is he talked about the potential of musicians, quote, contending with the wholesale automation of the very dear bought art they fought to achieve. And related to that, what Lucas said was just realistically, he was thinking about the world of what we call sync licenses, which is movies, television, advertising, paying to feature songs. And a lot of times, and especially the middle to low end of that, because on the high end, he said they're always going to be looking for recognizable hits, things that people already know. He doesn't see that ever going away. But there's this other world where they're already thinking like someone's sitting at a Suno text box, where they're thinking we need something that, with an upbeat vibe. Probably the descriptions they give are not that different. And he does see a world, especially as the quality gets towards even higher fi, where perhaps some of that work that was going to human musicians gets instead a tool like Suno's ends up being used. And that would displace some human work. And I just wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'll preface this with not really where we focus our energies. So take everything I'm going to say with a grain of salt. I think if you think, though, maybe I even hesitate to say the low end or the high end. If you think that maybe some of that low-end work is going to get automated or partially automated. What that does is, I think actually what you said is every single business, every single creator has like a median music department behind them. And so now the deli on the corner is going to have a jingle in that deli. And that would not be possible today, right? They're not going to have the means to go hire someone to write them a jingle, or just starting off content creator is going to have okay B-roll footage. And I think that is very powerful. But it also has a side effect of, while it may have displaced some work, it has also created a lot of other work that gets all of these people hungry for more music in their deli or in their content, and actually gets them wanting. So I think in aggregate, it probably has more people wanting, certainly music in general, but probably also like music that was produced by people, or at least in concert with people. So it's like not obvious to me that even that, which is supposed to be the quote unquote most automatable bit of this, it's super not obvious to me that just goes away.
It's a rising tide lifts all boats theory is what you're believing at this point.
Yeah, I guess let's say it like this. If every small business owner is now, I have a lot of different jingles and I'm now much more into music and I now have an exacting ear, that is good for musicians in general. Yes, it may have shifted some stuff around, but if we talk about the GDP of music, it is definitely increased in that scenario.
With any powerful technology, and I think you do have a powerful technology, there's unintended consequences.
For sure. I'm not trying to say that there are not. I would also say, just like in the case of the deli owner having a music department behind them virtually, let's say, I think 1 billion people making music and sharing it makes those 1 billion people appreciate music more, appreciate human artists more, have a closer connection to human artists because they feel like they know part of their process. It's like the reason you resonate with certain artists is because you think you have something in common with them, something. And so I think that brings everybody closer to artists, not dehumanizes them in aggregate.
You play bass, right?
I pretend to, yeah. My very formative playing years were a lot of jam bands. I've seen Fish quite a lot, and then lots of kind of adjacent type music, some, let's say, fusion-y jazz, listening to a lot of funk recently. These are all like actually bass forward genres, I would say. So maybe I'm a narcissist, but yeah, I think I don't consciously try to steer what my tastes are.
And this process of co-founding this company and seeing this model develop and then hearing the results, how has it changed your ideas about what music is, what music making is, the nature of popular music? What sort of new ideas has it instilled in you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think probably the biggest one is I have, again, a little selfishly, really learned to love lyrics much, much more than I did. I'm not a particularly good reader, for example. I've never had a great appreciation for prose or music or lyrics. And both seeing how good lyrics beget good music and also just seeing the creative lyrics that we see people putting into our tool has really made me learn to appreciate what I would consider good lyrics in music that I have listened to a million times and just not really appreciated the lyrics. So I feel like I have a renewed love of English in some sense for all of this, which is definitely not what I would have expected when starting this company.
People should know that you have a choice with the lyrics for Suno. You can put in your own lyrics or just describe a subject matter, and ChatGPT generates the lyrics. It's one of the first examples I've seen of two different AI models truly collaborating in a creative effort.
It's very cool. I will tell you, though, most of the usage is BYO lyrics.
Interesting.
And I think we see people get sucked into it because it's like the tool that you have given them to be expressive is text. And so I want to get sucked in and I want to be creative with text. We see a ton of editing of GPT lyrics also. You can take it, you start to smith it, you make them more topical. Sometimes the thing didn't really understand what you were after, whatever it is. And then you are, once you do that, you are a music maker and you are sucked in and you are going to get addicted because this is like the most fun, in my opinion, a human can have.
One of the interesting things we talked about on a technical level, and it's pretty mind-blowing, is the extent to which what the model has to do to generate a convincing song in all these genres. And this was one of the reasons why people were telling me just a year ago that it wasn't really possible yet, is because it's everything from the underlying composition, the melody, the chord changes, to the arrangement, the instrumentation, the reverb settings on each thing, the overall mix. It's a close to an unquantifiable number of variables when we break it down. But the trick is is that it doesn't do each of these things bit by bit. It groks the whole through the learning process and then it learns how to spit something fresh from what it's learned. That's essentially the trick, right? It doesn't have to learn each little bit of it doesn't consciously understand this is what a bass player does here. It understands it as part of the whole and regurgitates something fresh based on that understanding. It's a little hard to wrap one's head around.
Yeah, it certainly for us too. I don't pretend to really be able to give tremendous insight here. I think maybe I can analogize in a couple of different ways. It's people don't program into GPT, this is a noun and this is a verb, and it comes out with reasonable text. But also people don't program into people, this is a noun and this is a verb. You learned to speak before you knew sentence structure, and you learned to sing before you knew that there were 12 tones in the musical system that you came up in. And so in some sense, these systems are so complex that you would be doomed to fail trying to model the individual components, and you have to model the system as a whole. And I still think we have a long ways to go there. And it will be jarring sometimes when when our stuff comes out and breaks one of the rules. But also, without those constraints of this is the song structure and this is the bass line, etc., it is actually much more freeing in terms of what we are able to make and the things that we can bring to bear. And we are somehow not as shackled by some of the quote unquote musical canon that may have been programmed into a different model. It took a long time to reach this level also. The first year of the company was trying to figure out the basic technologies to make this work. And we are almost 7 months after putting out our first model, and the company is almost 2 years old. Read into that there was a lot of R&D to make this a reality.
We talked about the idea of the black box, the model doing stuff that it learns this stuff and then does things that you don't quite, it will surprise you. You don't quite understand how it does all the things it does. You actually said it's beyond a black box.
Yeah, I forget the exact context in which I said it, but it's really bad because we don't even, at least in text, for example, you understand the individual components. You understand that each token is a word, and you have very good intuition for what the word microphone means. And for us, each individual component that we are modeling is just a little bit of audio. It's a certain amount of time of audio. And it is really hard to have intuition about that. So we don't have great intuition about the models, and we also don't have great intuition about the underlying representation. In a different setting, this might be scary. I don't think we are worried about music models taking over the world. In that sense, we actually don't need to spend quite as much time really understanding these. And then I think the last thing I'll say there is evaluation of AI models is a really big field, and it's fraught with all sorts of problems. People will have these quantitative metrics, and you say, my model does better on all of these benchmarks than your model. And these don't work super well in text, and they're really bad in audio. And so ultimately, the best arbiters of what comes out of these things is your ears. And having real music lovers at the company just pays off in droves there, because everybody loves to listen and critique and try to improve. And it doesn't get boiled down to one number.
And that's our show. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, subscribe to Rolling Stone Music Now, wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us 5 stars and a nice review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, because that's always appreciated. But as always, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week.